So let me ask you something. Have you ever looked into the dead eyes of a Care Bear and thought, yep, that's the devil? No? Well, congratulations. You're not a parent in the 1980s. This episode is about toys. You know, the things children use to build imagination and social skills. Unless, of course, they're cursed by Satan himself and sold in every major department store across America. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the toy aisles of the 1980s with the Satanic Panic. You see, during the Satanic Panic era, every corner of pop culture was getting accused of being a front for ritual abuse or dark indoctrination, and toys, toys were prime suspects. If it made noise, lit up, or came from Japan, demonic. If it taught your kid independence or encouraged fantasy, you might as well call a priest. So today, we're going to take a walk through the toy history, the stuff that was banned, blamed, or burned, and we're going to ask the real question: was it ever actually about the toys, or were the grown-ups just scared of losing control? And let's start with the granddaddy of misunderstood play, Dungeons & Dragons. The game that asked you to pretend to be a wizard, roll dice, and maybe fight a goblin was treated like satanic training manual by a good chunk of America in the 1980s. A huge part of that came from media hysteria fueled by the disappearance of James Dallas Egbert III in 1979. A troubled teenager with real mental health struggles went missing, and somehow the story twisted into he vanished into the steam tunnels playing Dungeons & Dragons. Never mind that the truth was so much more mundane, the myth and the hysteria still stuck. TV specials like 60 Minutes and 2020 jumped on the D&D moral panic with dramatic voiceover and shadowy B-roll footage of dice being rolled into the dark. Evangelical groups produced anti-D&D propaganda videos, some of them featuring reformed players who now spoke of demons entering their homes through character sheets. Literally, they believed you were opening a spiritual portal every time you rolled a nat 20. Even the dice got demonized, seriously. Some church pamphlets explained that dice represented unnatural knowledge because they weren't normal six-sided cubes. If your dice had more than six sides, that meant you were obviously dabbling in ancient pagan mathematics. One group even suggested that a dungeon master was the real-life equivalent of a cult leader, which honestly, depending on your D&D group, probably not entirely wrong. And then, of course, there was Heman. At face value, it's a campy sword and sorcery cartoon for kids, but in the paranoid eyes of 1980s moral watchdogs, it was an invitation to devil worship. You had castles, you had skulls, you had sorcery, you had ancient power sources, and Skeletor, because, of course, Jack Skeleton Man equals the devil. Some fundamentalist Christians believe that the Gray Skull incarnation was actually a veiled reference to Freemasonry or literal spellcasting. They claim that Skeletor wasn't just a skeleton villain, he was a demon in disguise, and that he was modeled after real-world occult entities. There were actual church sermons warning families about He-Man's power from unknown sources, as if he was waiting to do chaos magic on CBS Saturday mornings. There were even concerns about the toys themselves. If the cartoon was demonic, then the plastic versions sold at Kmart were handheld blasphemies. Rumors spread that children playing with He-Man figures were reenacting black mass rituals, despite the fact that most of those play sessions probably just revolved in a lot of pew-pew noises and smashing Skeletor into couch cushions. And of course they targeted my main man, Orko. Again, this is a show where the main guy rides a green tiger named Battle Cat, but somehow the devil. And don't get me wrong, you'd think that the soft, cuddly, pastel-colored world of Carebears and My Little Pony would be immune to all this, but the Satanic Panic was thorough. The bears had symbols on their bellies: rainbows, stars, hearts, clovers, which certain religious groups thought they were occult symbols. But there were claims that the symbols used in Care Bear universes aligned with Wiccan or pagan imagery. Never mind that the symbols meant friendship or kindness. In a moral panic, a rainbow isn't a rainbow, it's a sigil from the Necronomicon. This all cultivated into actual boycotts, especially among homeschool Christian communities. Some even taught their children that playing with these toys could invite demonic influences into the home. And you know what? If demons were trying to infiltrate suburbia, infiltrating via teddy bears with magical tummies is honestly pretty genius. I want to concentrate on the 1980s in this video, but think about the fact that Pazuzu is now Labubu in current times. Even Strawberry Shortcake wasn't safe. Now you might be thinking, how in the world does a doll that smells like fruit make anyone think of Satan? Well, apparently, the gateway drug to witchcraft was herbalism. Religious critics accused Strawberry and her friends, like Lemon Meringue and Blueberry Muffin, of glamorizing herbal magic. They argued that the series promoted the use of potions and natural elements in a way that desensitized children to pagan rituals, even though we were all just wasting conditioner to make potions back then anyways. There were real articles at the time warning parents that characters who used berry spells or magic recipes were programming their kids to accept occult ideas. And herbalism was loosely connected to paganism, and paganism was lumped in with Satanism. Suddenly, you had moms banning dolls that smelled like fruit. It's a hell of a reach, but that's the kind of theme of the decade. It didn't help the Strawberry Shortcake franchise included books and comics that occasionally referenced folklore-style magic, rainbows, and nature-based imagery. None of it was evil, but when your worldwide view says anything outside Christianity as dark arts. Pie-making girl in a bonnet is just a tiny witch with a rolling pin. I mean, even the robots weren't safe. The Transformers were caught in the crossfire, largely due to the shape-shifting abilities. Some televangelists warned that encouraging kids to enjoy shape-shifting characters was conditioning them to accept demonic possession. I'm not kidding with that line either. You see, in certain strands of evangelical theology, demons are said to take forms or possess different bodies, so a robot turning into a truck, well, clearly demonic. Now add to that the show's language. Autobots, Cybertron, Decepticon, and you had a recipe for moral panic stew. Religious critics complained that these words were made up and therefore suspicious, possibly invoking unknown forces. That's right, if you invented a word, it might be a spell. The irony of all this, these were alien robots. The show was literally telling kids that these weren't humans. They were intergalactic machines fighting each other over space oil. But context doesn't matter. What matters was control, and anything that made kids passionate or imaginative without adult oversight, that was a threat. And that was the devil. So yeah, let's recap. In the 1980s, a teddy bear with a rainbow in its belly could summon the devil. And hell, and a bunch of friends in a basement pretending to be elves while apparently casting real spells that opened literal gateways to hell. The math didn't math, but fear never has to. This decade was a masterclass in cultural paranoia. Toys weren't just toys. They were Trojan horses, carriers of subversion, witchcraft, and rebellion, all wrapped in bright plastic and sold next to the Easy Bake Oven. And that's what's wild, is that people sounding the alarm didn't think they were overreacting. They thought they were protecting children from eternal damnation. All of this because some bear named Funshine had a sun on its stomach. But here's the thing. The panic was never really about the toys. It was about the fact that the kids were starting to form their own worlds. They had characters, stories, rituals, little communities of play that didn't rely on adult permission. That terrified people. And if your kid was playing Dungeons & Dragons, you weren't controlling the narrative anymore. They were. And that's when the real world fear kicks in, when the imagination stops being a sandbox and starts being a rebellion. And we haven't even touched on how this panic made people money. Whole cottage industries popped up around protecting your children from evil toys. There were church seminars, VHS exposés, traveling speakers, an entire book series dedicated to decoding satanic imagery and playthings. It was literal propaganda sold to terrified parents as truth, and the more ridiculous the claim, the more it spread. But the 1980s were just the warm-up, because then the 90s hit, and that's when things got weird in a whole new way. Suddenly the toys weren't just plastic, they had batteries, they talked, they glowed, they learned, they beeped at 3 a.m. in the morning of the night, whispering ancient gibberish. I'm talking about Furbies, Tamagotchi, Pokemon cards with occult energy symbols, and they thought Heman was scary. Wait till we get into the furry little surveillance demons. You know those demons sat on every kid's dresser and stared into their soul. So if you think the Satanic Panic ended in the 80s, we're just getting started. The next episode, we're cracking open the 90s. The toys got smarter, the paranormal got fucking dumber, and the parents got even louder. You know, same fear, different packaging. Until then, stay alert, and maybe take the batteries out of that Furby if you still have it, just in case. And you know, I'm really just getting started on YouTube. I've been on TikTok this whole time, so let's do the whole spill. Like and subscribe if you want more of this content.